What's good, guys? Today I want to talk about this book. And if you don't know what this book is, this is On a Sea of Glass, who some people have referred to as the best Titanic book ever.
The best I've seen.
So I recently read this book, and I wanted to let you guys know what I thought and whether I think it deserves a title of the best Titanic book ever. Now, I gotta be honest with you guys, it's a little embarrassing that now in 2022 was the first time I got a chance to read it, because this book has been around since 2012 and many people within the Titanic community have talked about it just because it's so filled with technical details and other eyewitness accounts. So it's very famous within the Titanic community. Now, for some reason, this book is very, very hard to get. I think I had to wait like 2 months for me to order it, but I got a hold of it, and honestly, guys, I can see why this book has caused such an uproar within the Titanic community. There were a lot of really new pieces of information surrounding the sinking, surrounding the building of the Titanic that I didn't know, that I had never heard of before. Now, what I want to do in this video is just point out real quick some of those new things that I learned by reading this book, On a Sea of Glass. Now, before we jump into it, I just wanted to say thank you to all the new Titanic nerds that have recently subscribed to my channel. Here we talk about the Titanic, disasters, and other historical events. So if you guys are into that, then please consider subscribing. Okay, let me start by saying that this is not a sponsored post. Nobody from On a Sea of Glass reached out to me. I was just interested in reading the book as a Titanic nerd. Now, the book has been around for a while. As I mentioned, it came out in 2012. This is the third edition, I believe. Yeah, the third edition from 2015, so presumably the most up-to-date one. The authors of this book are Tad Fitch, J. Kent Layton, and Bill Wormstead, and I finally got my hands on it. As I was saying, for some reason, this book is really hard to get a hold of. I think I found it on Amazon, and I ordered it and it took like 2 months to arrive. Now, a lot of us in the Titanic community, obviously we've read many books about the Titanic over the years. And for a long time, I think one of the main books that everyone would turn to was this one, Titanic: An Illustrated History by Don Lynch, and then the paintings by Ken Marshall. It's a classic. Everybody knows this book. Everybody's read this book. I read this when I was growing up. And there are many other books that are popular. I mean, there are children's books, there are more intense books. So I've read a lot of them. Obviously, I haven't read all of them, but that's one of the reasons why I was really interested in reading On a Sea of Glass. Because the cool thing about this book is that it re-examines everything that all the other books have talked about. It takes a look at all of our common knowledge that we have about the Titanic, and it really goes through it with a fine-tooth comb, and we really get some more historical context. Now, the Titanic community is interesting because, as you guys know, we are very obsessed. We love every single detail. We love timelines of the sinking. And Titanic is one of those things that no matter how long you've been researching or have been part of the community, it feels like there's always something new that is discovered. We're always learning something unique, whether it's about the timeline, whether it's about how the Titanic broke up and sank. There are always new discoveries that happen that change our understanding of what happened that night. And this book aims to sort of consolidate all of that new knowledge that we've acquired over the years and put it into one easy to access place. Now, when you first open the book, you get to an introduction, and here they set you up for what the book is going to be talking about. They explain the tone of the book, how the book was put together, how it's going to read, and basically what they tell you is that the point of this book is to provide the readers with more historical context so that we can better understand the Titanic disaster, and so we can get an accurate overview of the big picture. The next thing that you'll notice is that there's an author note, which I really like. They basically ask the question, which is sort of the elephant in the room: why another Titanic book?
Why?
Which of course is a really good question because there's hundreds of them. One of the things they say is, why another? Hasn't everything about the Titanic been told already? The answer to that question is a resolute no. So they go on and explain how they arrived at some of the new conclusions in this book, the data gathering process, all the different eyewitness accounts, and they set the stage for what we're about to read. Now, the next thing that you'll find is a prologue. So right before we dive into the main book, you get this prologue. And the prologue kicks off, and it's essentially from the viewpoint of Harold Cottam, who was the wireless operator working on the Carpathia and who heard Titanic's distress call. So there's a short prologue. Basically, we see things from the Carpathia's perspective, and then right when they're about to sail to the Titanic, it sort of brings us back in time, and then we get to chapter 1. And I thought that was just so well done. As soon as I read that prologue, I was like, okay, I'm ready to read this all in one night. So the one thing that I got to say about this book is that if you look at the text, I don't know if you guys can see this very well, but yeah, it's definitely not a light read by any means. The words are tiny. The letters are very, very small. Compare that to Titanic and Illustrated History, where you obviously have, bigger words. So there's a lot of information packed into this book, which is a good thing. The other thing you'll notice is that there are a lot of pictures, which is nice to have some pictures instead of just full-blown text, although there are pages where it's just, text. But the pictures are really interesting because I gotta say that there are many images there that I myself have never seen in my entire life. So it'll be pictures of the Titanic, but then it'll also be pictures of the Olympic. So when they're talking about a specific topic, such as the reception room and whatnot, oftentimes they'll include a picture of the Olympic, or if they're talking about the deck, the poop deck, they'll include a picture of the Olympic so that the reader can really put themselves there and try to imagine being on the Titanic, which I thought was very well done. Now, I don't want to spoil the book for you because I definitely think that anyone who is interested in the Titanic should read this book, but I'm going to tell you some of the top new things that I learned by reading this book. So one of the first things that you'll notice is regarding the Titanic origin story. A lot of us know Titanic's origin as that famous dinner between Bruce Ismay and Peary from Harlan and Wolff. And the story that we know is that they went to dinner and then the idea of Titanic was born. The idea of the three sisters in order to compete with the Mauretania and the Lusitania from the Cunard Line. The book here goes into detail as to why that probably didn't happen and that it's been a little bit sensationalized through the years, which was interesting. So now my understanding is that, that the dinner as we know it probably didn't happen. One of the other cool things that I really learned about were the changes that were done to Titanic during her fitting out. Obviously, there were changes done to B deck and the A deck promenade. We know that one of the main differences between the Olympic and Titanic was the enclosed A deck promenade. What I didn't know were some of the reasons why those changes happened, and I didn't know the extent to which it really pushed out Titanic's maiden voyage and how much stress it caused for everybody at the White Star Line and Harlan and Wolff, trying to complete these changes, trying to get the ship delivered on time. So they go into extreme detail talking about those changes on B deck, the windows, the configuration of the new cabins, the introduction of the private promenades on the parlor suites on B deck. So it's really, really good. Also, of course, the book really dives into the whole lifeboat conversation. Here, I learned a little bit more as to how that conversation played out between Carlisle, Thomas Andrews, and other key players. One of the things that I learned was that there was actually no mention of the need to carry more lifeboats, just that it would be good to install these new type Welland davits in order to be able to handle new boats. Another fun tidbit that I learned was a little bit more about the officers. For example, 5th Officer Lowe, he did not have a Welsh accent, as we see in James Cameron's Titanic.
Hey, listen to me, man, we have to go back.
And then we really learn a lot about what life was like during the maiden voyage. And one of the things that was sort of shocking to me is the extent to which Titanic was not complete. The book talks about many eyewitness accounts, basically stating that, people were still bringing in carpeting, that some of the sinks hadn't been properly installed. And one of the things that I found interesting was the fact that a lot of the heating in certain areas of the ship was not working properly. So second class had really bad heating, certain areas of third class, the heating wasn't working properly. There were some passengers where their cabins, they were freezing cold because the heating pipes, there were some problems with them. And then a few cabins down, there were some cabins that were extremely hot because all the heat was coming out there. So it was very interesting to hear these eyewitness accounts of the Titanic really being incomplete and the Titanic having a lot of problems, which gives you some context as to why Thomas Andrews was there with his guarantee group, really taking note of all of the problems, all of the changes that would be required after the maiden voyage. The book also really goes into what life was like during those first couple of days of the voyage. You really get to understand what the ocean liner ship life was like. One of the things to remember is the importance of the daily run. During all of these transatlantic crossings, one of the biggest points of excitement, I guess, was the daily run of the ship. So every single day, the ship would post how far they had traveled from the previous day. And many passengers, they loved to bet on this, right? So it was a really, really big, exciting time when the daily run was posted and then everybody could see who the winners and losers were, right? So people would just love to bet on that. The book also gives you information about things that you probably wouldn't have even thought before. So one of the things that I learned was that the White Star Line told their passengers that if a ship arrived after 8 p.m. on a certain night, that they would be able to sleep on the ship and have breakfast the next day and then disembark. So that's one of the things that I never knew about, right? Because many people have often said, oh, what if the Titanic arrived on Tuesday instead of Wednesday? Well, the White Star Line and many other ocean lining companies, they were prepared for that to happen. Now, obviously, the way that this book covers the sinking is, of course, in extreme detail. You guys just really need to read that, because as soon as the sinking started, I was just glued to the pages. I didn't even want to sleep. They basically take different chunks of time and they allocate many, many different pages to, say, for example, 11:45 to midnight, right? And then they go and tell many passengers and crew members accounts of what was happening. And they're basically short paragraphs. So there are many pages where you're just talking about 10 minutes of time, but they're providing context as to, what was happening in first class. What did this crew member see? What was the person in third class doing? So they really kind of jump back and forth. It's similar to A Night to Remember, where you're getting multiple perspectives at the same time, which I thought was really well done. It truly paints a very vivid picture and you feel like you're transported there. One of the things that I wasn't prepared for was how emotional things got when the ship actually sank, because the book really spends a lot of time providing the accounts of the people in the lifeboats to excruciating detail. It was heart-wrenching to hear the accounts and to put yourself in the shoes. The book really transports you there. And I gotta be honest, I found myself on the verge of tears during some of those pages, and I'm not really an emotional person. That had never happened to me before, but it was just very well done. And then obviously they go into detail of the aftermath of the sinking, the American inquiry, the British inquiries, what survivors did, what the logistics looked like when Carpathia arrived in New York. Now, the cool thing about the book is that you'll notice that the main section really finishes sort of early on, and then you have a whole other chunk of just appendices. Now, these appendices basically focus on specific contentious issues that people have discussed over the years, right? So there are many topics that they really go into detail. So some of those topics are Titanic's technical specifications and common misconceptions, the question of binoculars, were the engines reversed, the extent of the actual iceberg damage, was there gunfire on that night, the Duff Gordon drama that happened in Lifeboat Number 1, what happened to Captain Smith, and many, many other topics. And they really break apart those issues and provide an incredible amount of data to back up what they're saying in the book. And they also show some pictures, which I like pictures. So yeah, that was my experience reading the book, and I wanted to share that with you guys. So I think to wrap up this video, what I want to say is that on A Sea of Glass, The Life and Loss of the RMS Titanic, I personally think it's truly one of the most comprehensive accounts of what happened that night. It's really one of the most incredibly detailed books that I've read about the Titanic. Now, is this the best Titanic book that I've ever read? That's hard to say, because the word best is really, really subjective. What I will say is this is definitely the most enjoyable and educational Titanic book that I've ever read in my entire life. Everything the authors talk about is backed up with technical comparisons, with multiple eyewitness accounts, many that I've never heard of or read about before. It's just incredibly detailed. And you guys know that as Titanic nerds, we love detail. So in summary, I highly recommend this book to any person who is really passionate about the Titanic, about the sinking, about the story. So I guess I'll end this video with just saying a huge thank you to the authors of this book. Thank you, Tad Fitch. Thank you, J. Kent Layton. And thank you, Bill Wormstead. All right, guys, that is it for me this week. If you guys enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit that like button. If you want to see me debunk some crazy Titanic conspiracy theories, watch this video here. And if you guys want to know what would have happened if Titanic hit the iceberg head on, click this video here. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. The link to all the merch is, of course, in the description, and I'll see you guys next week.